Good afternoon, everyone. It is April 7th. Going to talk about the war in Ukraine and kind of what we probably will see in the next few months as spring comes to Ukraine. Things start to dry out a little bit from the wintry, muddy season, and potentially what Russia will be doing on their offensive, because Russia is the only one at this point capable of going on the offensive. The Ukrainians are definitely in a defensive posture at this point because of basically a lack of equipment. That's really what it's coming down to, a lack of equipment and ammunition coming out of the United States, and a slowdown, or at least they're waiting for the mechanisms from the European Union. I know the European Union has approved funding for ammunition and equipment, but we're still waiting on it getting there. The ability for them to logistically get it to the front lines has significantly slowed because of the funds and whatnot. So basically, looking at Ukraine here, the main areas where we will likely see much of the fighting is this front that runs from probably Severodonetsk all the way down to Marinka right there. So this is where the Russians will likely conduct a major offensive operations over the spring. And I'm talking mid to late May, possibly even June, where they will try to push hard, build up. Currently, the Russians are making gains on the front line, and I'll zoom in and kind of talk about exactly what we're looking at. So previously, Avdiivka was taken, and this is where the Russians were focusing a lot of their push after that. Largely unsuccessful here. They were largely incapable of using the momentum they had from Avdiivka to push further into Ukrainian territory. However, they have decided to switch tactics and locations up towards Bakhmut. So we'll zoom in here. This is actually where Russia is seeing success currently. They are using overwhelming force tactics with large amounts of personnel, infantry, dismounts, being supported by some sort of heavy armor, mechanized infantry with infantry fighting vehicles, things of that nature, and specifically looking at this right in this region right here. So we'll zoom in further so I can talk, because this is the main focus, at least for the next probably 30 to 60 days for Russia, is this axis that runs from Bakhmut to Chasiv Yar right here. So this is the area. Chasiv Yar is currently the focus, and I know this map doesn't necessarily show the updated movements, and so I'll talk about that a little bit. So we'll zoom in closer. Chasiv Yar right here, obviously Bakhmut right here. The Russians are hitting this area from two angles. They're using this road to the south. They have conducted operations in Ivanivsky, which is right here, and they have taken, it doesn't show it here, but they have taken Bodanivka. This was confirmed by geolocated footage that the Russians had basically taken the entirety of Bodanivka, and the Ukrainians have been forced to withdraw. This is key because what you're seeing here is Russia pushing along two axes, here and here, aiming at Chasiv Yar. And Chasiv Yar actually is quite big. It's a complex of villages that runs in this area right here. So this is a pretty strategic location to take next after Bakhmut, and that is what Russia is focusing on. They're focusing on this likely in the next 30, 60, 90 days. They would consider it a pretty huge victory if they could move through, take this territory, and essentially take away Chasiv Yar, which is currently being used as a Ukrainian staging base for operations on the front lines, where the front lines currently sit. And why this is key is because as the Russians, with their superior numbers, continue to push forward, it becomes progressively harder for the Ukrainians to defend. So if you remember, there was a lot of stagnation along the front lines here, and I'll zoom out a little bit more to talk about this. So stagnation on the front lines that ran from Bakhmut all the way down through here, and then along all of these lines, there really hasn't been any movement. The reason is because the Ukrainians have set up incredible defensive postures here. Trenches, pre-sighted in artillery locations. It makes it incredibly difficult for the Russians to move. The Russians have lost thousands upon thousands of men, hundreds upon hundreds of pieces of equipment attempting to take these areas, and that is no different to this day. It continues to be a problem for Russia. So what we are seeing is similar tactics, but as Russia takes slowly various swaths of territory, they end up behind the more fortified defenses of Ukraine. As they bound forward, as they move forward in this push to take Chasiv Yar, Ukraine had major defenses set up along the trench line here to block out Bakhmut. As the Russians have pushed past that, taken this territory over, there are secondary trenches, but they are not as well defined. They're not as well built. They were kind of hastily developed because the focus was on the main front line. Now, there are consecutive fallback positions here that Ukraine has developed, but each fallback position is going to be progressively more limited in its capability. So really, as Russia takes more ground, it becomes more easy for Russia to continue to take more ground. Now, the counter to this, though, is as they take more ground, they grow further from their what is their logistics lines here. And their logistics lines largely need road access, road here, and then there are some small farming roads that run up here. So these logistics lines, as they extend out, will become more difficult for Russia to maintain, pushing towards Chasiv Yar. However, currently, as Russia receiving equipment from North Korea, receiving equipment somewhat in limited aspects from Iran, and again, North Korea is a bit limited as well at this point, but with Russia fully online with its production and Ukraine receiving essentially no help as of right now, there is definitely an advantage for Russia in moving forward, and they're going to try to seize that advantage in the next 2 months, potentially to try to take Chasiv Yar. We may see some feints along this major front line. We may see pushes to the south, down here near Marinka, obviously continued pushes out of Avdiivka, and that's kind of what we'll look at. I don't foresee Russia focusing anywhere else. I highly doubt they try to push north here. This is extraordinarily defended. The river poses a problem. The Dnieper River down here poses a problem for Russia. So pushing to retake any kind of territory in the Kherson region is unlikely as well. So that's what we're looking at over the next few months when it comes to spring, heading into summer for Russia. Ukraine absolutely on the defensive and will remain on the defensive probably for the foreseeable future, at least until late summer, assuming they get some sort of push of equipment from the West, United States specifically. Until then, they're on the defensive and they're just continuing to try to make it as painful as possible for the Russians. However, that's going to become progressively more difficult as Russia pushes inward.